Prince was the Minneapolis Sound's most important composer. He gave the sound color and distinction, harmony and form. He was its high priest and the singular figure who impacted it more than anyone. But he was not its progenitor. Making Prince the inventor of the Minneapolis Sound is like making Beethoven the inventor of classical music or Mary J. Blige the creator of hip hop soul. These artists are exquisite practitioners of their craft, arguably the best, respectively. However, the sonic traditions that form the music they trailblazed are much older than these musical giants. The Minneapolis Sound came along before Prince's birth.
Thanks for listening to Read Minnesota Books. I'm your host, Deborah Copperrood. My guest today is Rashad Shabazz. He's an associate professor at Arizona State University, where his academic expertise combines human geography, cultural studies, gender studies, and critical race studies. He has a PhD in the history of consciousness. His first book, Spatializing Blackness, from University of Illinois Press in 2015, was about carceral power in Chicago. His scholarship has been published by many academic journals, and he's also written for Places and The Conversation, and you may have caught him on 2020, on the BBC, or in Time magazine. Earlier this year, the University of North Carolina Press published his second book, Prince's Minneapolis, a biography of sound and place. Welcome to Read Minnesota Books.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. What is your connection to Minnesota?
I went to undergrad in Minnesota. I first attended Southwest State University in Marshall, Minnesota. And midway through my academic career there, I transferred to Mankato State University, is what it was called. And then while I was there, it was the university was renamed Minnesota State University Mankato. So I completed my degree in Mankato, and I've been connected to the city and to the state since then.
So tell me about your book, Prince's Minneapolis.
Prince's Minneapolis is a story about the Minneapolis music scene, and it's a story about the city, its people, and how Prince really figures into its music scene. Um, a lot of people know the phrase the Minneapolis Sound, and they immediately think about Prince, as they should. The story the book tells is that the Minneapolis Sound didn't begin in 1979 with Prince, or 1981 with Dirty Mind, or those albums. The Minneapolis Sound actually began in 1849 when Minneapolis was founded as a city, and it traces the growth of the city's music scene from there all the way up until 1987 when Prince releases his magnum opus, Sign of the Times. And what I do is I fold Prince into the story of the city's music scene. And in talking about the music scene, I talk about the settlement of the city, the industrialization of the city, music education, how the city was racially segregated, how Prince's family came to be, how funk and rhythm and blues emerged, the Black communities in North and South Minneapolis, the various music venues that housed the music that he and other artists played, and also the role of the downtown music scene in the early 1970s that was a real boon to the music that he created. And I talk about that music and how all of those streams of music fed into the creation of the albums that he released between 1977 and 1987.
He famously would have pop-up concerts at his home at Paisley Park. When I was in college a long time ago, I rode out with some friends there really late at night, stood in line, and we didn't get in because we were too far back in line. But it was so exciting to be there. I remember not getting in like very fondly and vividly. You write in the book's preface that you got to see Prince perform live at Paisley Park. Tell me what that was like.
I did. I got into one of those shows. It was in 1998. I was in Mankato at the time, and I was dating this woman who her ex-boyfriend was one of Prince's bouncers, one of the guards, and
Oh.
and he actually called her and told her like, boss is playing, the boss is playing, and she told me. We showed up, and he was not at all happy to see that she had brought a date. It was not a good scene. But while they argued a little bit outside the door, I just walked in. I was just like, I want no part of this lovers quarrel. I'm here to see Prince. And it was about midnight. We got there, and Prince came out on stage a little bit before 1 in the morning, and he played until 4 a.m. and
Oh,
it
wow.
it was spectacular. There was about 40 of us, 30 or 40 of us in the room. Prince served Chips Ahoy cookies and Hawaiian punch. It was on the table. It was like Chips Ahoy and a big jugs of Hawaiian punch, and it was plastic cups. And he played until 4 a.m. and it was extraordinary. He actually left the stage for part of the show to give directions to the band. So he stood there while the band, and he stood right next to me, and I shook his hand. He was working.
Hmm.
That it was very clear that he was working, and he allowed people to watch him work, but he was not there to engage in any kind of way.
Hmm.
And because when he shook my hand, he didn't look at me. He looked straight at the band, and yeah, it was incredible to watch a master and someone of that caliber do his thing right in front of you. It was like watching Picasso paint.
Yeah. Wow, what a memory. So your book examines how Minneapolis, the place, informed the sound. Can you explain a little bit more by what you mean about the geography of music?
So in the early 20th century, a number of geographers and historians started to write about American music and geography. And they started to write about Black music in the South and country music in the South. And they started to write about how the place of the South was informing the harmonies, the rhythms, the chords that we use, the instrumentations, um, the sound of that music, and how it was related to the South. And that group of scholars and historians, they unwittingly started a form of intellectual investigation about music and geography. And it really expanded in the 60s and the 1970s. And then for decades, it kind of died. And then it reemerged in the early part of the 21st century. And I came across this work while I was writing my first book, Spatializing Blackness. And what I what I came to discover is that all music, it doesn't matter what the genre is deeply informed by place. And what that means is that in some forms of music, let's take rap music, for example, because it's an easy it's an easy way to illustrate this. Rap lyrics are deeply geographic. Every rapper, whether it be Missy Elliott or Drake or Kanye or whomever, they always talk about their neighborhood, their block, their city in their music all the time. I mean, it's hard to listen to rap music without knowing where the rapper is from because
Sure.
they always talk about it. So, but that also translates to things like rhythmic patterns and instrumentation and tempo and the chords that are used and all of the ways that music is created is shaped by place. So whether we're talking about the Red Hot Chili Peppers or Madonna, or George Michael or Beethoven or Beyonce or Alicia Keys, it's tied to place. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to take that idea and those concepts of the relationship between place and sound and to really focus on, to me, one of the most underrated musical cities in the world, Minneapolis. Because not only is Prince there, but we have Morris Day and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. And I mean, just so many great musicians.
Hmm.
Minneapolis does not get the kind of credit that it deserves as a musical city. It's always about, New York, LA, Austin, and Nashville. That's pretty much it in the United States. And those, of course, are great musical cities, but Minneapolis is on equal par, if not better in
Hmm.
so many ways because of the diversity of its sound and because of the kind of genius musicians that have come out of there. And so I wanted to take that idea about music and geography and apply it to Minneapolis. And what better musician to talk about the musical geography of the city and its history than Prince? So, in a lot of ways, the book is telling a story about, it's a kind of biography of the city and its sound from the very beginning of the city all the way up until 1987. And Prince is, of course, the most important musician in the city's history by far. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. And so, what I do is, in talking about the city's sound, I insert Prince as this really important figure, and I build the story of the city sound around him and the role that he played in its evolution. The city sound started a century before he was even conceived, but he inherits it. So when he's a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old kid and he's getting into the music industry, he's inheriting what came a century before him. And that's one of the big elements of the book, is to show that what was happening in the 19th century, what was happening in the early 20th century, and what was happening when his father and mother were part of the music scene, he inherits. And what he does is he expands it, he builds on it, and he helps to grow what we know as the Minneapolis sound. That's really what he is doing. And it also helps to give us a sense of his genius.
Hmm.
We all know that Prince was a genius. That's it's undisputed. Like, and in some respects, it's not, this might be controversial. It's not that interesting to talk about his genius, actually, in and of itself. But I think the more interesting story are the conditions that his genius emerged under. That, to me, is what is fascinating about Prince. Not just that he could play all these instruments and he had this, incredible musical ability, but it's the context that gives rise to it. The industrialization, the migration, the settlement of these Scandinavians, the creation of this musical community, the racial segregation that underwrites it, and the building of all of these music venues. And that Prince is just born in it. Fortunately, he was fortunate to be born in it. And that context is what gave rise to the unbelievable musical ability and the sound. Really, it's the sound that he creates in the late 70s and early 80s that just takes off and becomes really the most dominant and popular sound in not just American music, but really in Western music. The entire Western world, the Minneapolis sound is a key figure in the music of the Western world over the last 40 years.
Yeah. I particularly liked the part about learning about how the school-based music training in the early 20th century forged the high levels of musical literacy. That was Fantastic.
Thaddeus Paul Giddings, who created this really innovative music program for the Minneapolis public schools. It was the gem of the nation. No public school system had the kind of public education where students were taught music theory, instrumentation, and music education was compulsory. It was required. You couldn't, you couldn't go to the Minneapolis public school system from 1911 until the mid 1950s and not take music. And what it did is it raised the musical literacy of generations of children. And it really helped to create the bands that began to emerge in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And Prince and his parents and all of Prince's friends, they were part of that. They were inheritors of that. Chicago, where I'm from, didn't have that. Phoenix, where I live part-time, doesn't have that. New York City, where I also live part-time, never had that. Neither did Austin, Texas, or Nashville or Los Angeles. No one had that. And that's what really made Minneapolis such a musical powerhouse. And Prince was fortunate to have that structure in his life.
Yeah, I wish we could bring that back for everybody.
I do too. I do too.
It would be a different world.
It would be.
So when you were coming up with the concept for this book, like you are a professor, you're an academic, you probably have to write academic works to keep your job, to get tenure.
Okay.
But who were you thinking of as your audience for this book? Because here in Minneapolis, it's like in the front of all the bookstores, which is where you don't often see like a more academic book. But this is also very readable and interesting to a popular audience.
I wrote this book for Minneapolitans and for Prince fans. I did not write this book for academics. And obviously, academics can engage with it, but I wrote it for Prince fans and Minneapolitans because I wanted to contribute something to the city. And I wanted to make sure everyday people, teachers and bus drivers and servers, and, everyday folks in the city could pick this book up and read it. And so I really worked to ensure that it was accessible. And in doing that, I focused more on my life as a writer. I'm a researcher, I'm a teacher, and I do all of those scholarly things, but I'm also a writer. And as a writer, what every writer wants is somebody to read their stuff. That's it. In the end, you just want somebody to read your stuff. And I made sure that when I wrote this, that I did not write it in a way that would make people reading it difficult. And at the same time, writing in accessible language doesn't mean that the ideas are watered down. It actually just means that I needed to take more care to ensure that I could um, write it in an accessible way and get the ideas through. And in that respect, this is this is the most important thing I've ever written, not just because it's about Prince, not just because it's about the city that I've, adopted as my own Minneapolis, but it's the democratic value of the work that this is a work that is for everybody. If you are curious and you can read, you can pick this book up and you can engage with it. So I really wanted this work to be for the city, for the people, for the fans, and I wanted it to contribute to the everyday literary diet of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota.
In the book, you describe Minneapolis with this neologism. Prince is out of touch with the rest of the country hometown. So earlier this year, when Minneapolis and Minnesota were going through the federal occupation, as someone who has really studied the city, I imagine that you had thoughts about what was happening, what was coming up. Can you talk about your observations?
Yeah, I actually ended up writing a piece for Zocalo Public Square precisely about this. I was in Minneapolis giving some book talks, and I spent some time in South Minneapolis where the protests and the murders by ICE occurred. And it really brought me back to the book and that quote by Terry Lewis that Minneapolis is out of touch with the rest of the nation, and that's part of what makes Minneapolis so fascinating as a city, both politically, culturally, artistically, and economically. That out of touch nature with the rest of the country, for one, it helped to produce a person like Prince, but it also helped to create a set of values about the importance of immigration, the necessity of immigrants, a big tent idea about what it means to live in a multiracial democracy, and and so Prince very much fits into that. His music, it's big tent music, meaning you know as he says, black, white, Puerto Rican, everybody just a freaking. It is a music that is for everybody, right? It has elements of black music. It has elements of white music. It has elements of what we call global or international music. And because it has this flexibility, this openness, that's what makes it so good. That's also what makes Minneapolis such an interesting city to live in. Even in the face of its icy cold months and, January, February, March, it's a wonderful city. And part of what makes it so wonderful is its immigrant community, its openness to diversity, its left of center, funky politics. All of these things make it a rich place to live, to raise children, to go to school, and to visit. And in many respects, what the federal government's actions in Minneapolis and in the Twin Cities, and really it's spread out to the various corners of the state. What it's trying to do is to undermine that left of center, different, out of touch reality. And in doing that, it's undermining the values of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota. And the people of Minnesota and the people of Minneapolis chose to be this way. And those are choices that go back to the 19th century.
Hmm.
This didn't just happen, in the last 5 years. It didn't happen in, 20 years ago. This happened, in 1840s. That's when this started. And and so, you know, this book is really an attempt to provide some context to the current crisis that we see in Minneapolis vis-a-vis ICE.
Hmm.
And it's also a way to celebrate and acknowledge the the history of the city, its culture, its politics, its music scene, and all of the good and the bad that came with it, because, it was contentious, throughout. It was never just a, kumbaya story. It was contentious. But that contention gave rise to a set of values that the city really began to embrace by the 70s and 80s. And Prince and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and Morris Day and all of these black musicians from the South and the North part of Minneapolis helped to lead the way. And they helped to turn the page on that era of the segregated city and the segregated sound. They helped to turn the page on that. And in many respects, what the Trump administration is trying to do is turn the page back the other way. Uh,
Hmm.
and the people of the city resisted that. And I could not have been prouder. I could not have been prouder. And of course, the loss of life is absolutely horrific and tragic and should have never happened. The fear that is running through the various immigrant communities, there's no place for that. And at the same time, the way the city stood up the way the city bonded together. And of course, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder in 2020, I could not have been prouder. And you know, this book just happened to land when all of this was occurring.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it was really good timing.
It was really good timing. Yeah.
You've written a book about Chicago, you've written about Minneapolis, and your ASU bio says you're working on a book about New York. Are there pop stars or music in that one?
Yes, lots of pop stars, also music. So the book is of the three books, they're all the same. They're all approached in the same way. All of my work and all of these three books, they look at the relationship between people and place. And you know, Princess Minneapolis is about the place of Minneapolis, the production of its sound, and how you know Prince's sound could have only sounded the way that it does because it came out of Minneapolis. If he was born in Seattle or in LA or Nashville, completely different sound. And also the social and economic and racial dynamics that factor into it. The third book is about New York City's built environment. And it similarly, it's a historical work. It looks at the history of the city. And what I do is I look at how New York came to be built, the forces that shaped it, the people who were involved, and how those things informed the building, the planning of New York City. So it's very much like the other two. You know, the lens is just slightly shifted. The first one was about carceral or prison-like
Hmm.
um, geographic geographic forms that were inserted into Black Chicago. The second one was about sound. And the third is about the built environment. You know, why do the streets look the way that they do? You know, why are the buildings the way that they are? The subway system, why is it such a walkable city and not a drivable city? The creation of the bridges, all of those things, right? That's what the book is about. And part of the way that I tell the story are through the various musical and artistic characters. So, you know, there's part of the book where when the Dutch settled in New York City in 1614, it was around like 35th and Broadway right now. That was where Tupac Shakur was shot five
Oh,
times and
yeah.
robbed. You know, that famous, you know, when he was shot and he survived. It was around there. So that's part of the way that I tell the book by connecting people to these sort of um, current day figures and historical markers all throughout the city.
That sounds great. Are you on social media? Where can folks find you to get updates about when that book comes out?
I am Dr. Shabazz at Blue Sky. I'm also Dr. Shabazz on Instagram, Dr. Shabazz on both of them. And yeah, you can find updates about the upcoming book, as well the upcoming book on New York, as well as book talks about Princess Minneapolis.
Great. And I like to ask everybody, who is your favorite Minnesota writer?
Wow. Who is my favorite Minnesota writer? Prince. Prince. Absolutely.
Do you have a favorite Prince song or album, or is that a tiresome question for you?
Yes. No, no, no. It's not a tiresome question at all. My favorite Prince song is the final song that I describe in the book, Adore. That is my
Okay,
favorite Prince song, and my favorite album is Sign of the Times.
great. Well, thank you so much for joining me on Read Minnesota Books. It was wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.